You're listening to Beyond Wellness Radio, bringing you the cutting edge in health, biohacking, and sports performance. Stay up to date and listen anywhere and anytime on your computer, tablet, or smartphone by subscribing on iTunes. Catch your host, Dr. Justin Marchegiani, as he answers your burning health questions as well as interviews from world-renowned guest experts. For more Beyond Wellness Radio, go to beyondwellnessradio.com.
Hey there, it's Dr. Justin Marchegiani. Welcome to Beyond Wellness Radio. Feel free and head over to beyondwellnessradio.com where you can access our full podcast transcriptions. While you're there, you can also sign up for our thyroid and female hormone video series. This series goes into the root cause of why your hormones are out of balance. While you're there, you can also schedule a functional medicine consult with Dr. Justin, myself, where we'll dig deeper into the root cause of your health challenges. Feel free and think of sharing this podcast with at least one person. This podcast grows by people sharing it. Sharing is caring. If you can think of one person that can benefit from this information, please feel free and share it. If you're enjoying the podcast, make sure you subscribe on iTunes. You can also click below the video or podcast where you'll see the iTunes review button and leave us a review. You can also sign up for the newsletter at beyondwellnessradio.com where you'll get updates before anyone else. Thank you so much and enjoy the show. YouTube as well. Any questions, feel free and pipe them in. Today's podcast will be on thyroid. Evan, can you hear me okay?
I sure can. You sound good.
Awesome, man. We are live. What's going on, man?
Oh, not too much. Like I told you, somebody in France has had a fun weekend with my business credit card. So, besides that, everything is good.
Very cool, man. Yeah. Well, at least you got a Capital One card, so you're pretty well protected, right?
Yep.
That's awesome. So we're live on Facebook and YouTube. Again, better to be on YouTube, in my opinion, because you get to see Evan and myself. If you're watching me on Facebook right now, we're a little compromised. We only got my feedback. You're not going to hear Evan's side of it. So feel free and check out youtube.com/justinhealth to be able to see Evan's pretty face and to be able to get some questions there. But we will answer questions on Facebook Live too.
Cool. So today we wanted to talk about thyroid. There's many lab tests out there that you can get. Still, conventional doctors are not running the lab tests that are important, though. Some of these antibody markers, some of the reverse T3 markers. Maybe you should briefly chat about that, just since people may be on Facebook. Talk people through, why is this happening? Why are these conventional doctors not running these other important thyroid markers? Why is it just TSH and some of the other boring stuff?
Great question. And again, today we're talking about thyroid. We've talked about this topic a lot. I've done a lot of videos on it. I have a book coming out on this topic very shortly as well. So I'm just going to kind of do a brief overview. Feel free and check out Evan's page, notjustpaleo.com, and his podcast for more info, and as well as mine. And we'll give you more info here today, and hopefully we'll be able to have a live interaction. But Evan's question, just for the Facebook Live listeners, again, we got this podcast going live here on YouTube too, is the questions about conventional thyroid issues versus functional thyroid issues. And this is a big difference. And most people that go and get help from their conventional physicians on matters of thyroid issues, they think that their conventional doctor is ruling them out for thyroid issues. And they may, if it's an extreme thyroid issue, very, very high TSH, extreme thyroid swelling, maybe a lot of hyper symptoms if they're Graves or on the hyper side, or if they have a lot of thyroid destruction or a goiter and things, they may get picked up by conventional testing. But many patients, they aren't getting picked up on conventional testing because they're kind of in no man's land. Conventional medicine looks at things like an on and off switch. You're either healthy, right? The light's on, or you're unhealthy, the light's off. And we know in functional medicine world, that light switch is more of a dimmer switch, right? The light may be on halfway, right? You're halfway healthy, or another way to look at it, you're halfway to not being healthy, but it may not be all the way off. It may be just flickering a little bit. And unless you're all the way off, what's going to happen is they're not going to see anything wrong with your health issues regarding your thyroid, and they're not going to make any recommendations for interventions. And that's the biggest problem with thyroid issues, looking for that from the conventional to the functional medicine realm. And also you have to look at the tools that they have, right? They have one tool, most part two. You're going to have some kind of surgical intervention, or you're going to have some kind of pharmaceutical intervention, none of which typically fixes the root cause of what's going on, especially when we understand that thyroid issues are 90% autoimmune in nature. I'd say at least 50 to 90%. So we know if it's autoimmune and we don't fix the underlying cause of why the autoimmunity is there, right, then the underlying mechanism of the antibodies and the immune system attacking the thyroid tissue is still happening in the background.
That's terrible. I mean, and we've got thousands of people at this point who we work with where they're on thyroid drugs and they still feel terrible. And they'll go back and say, hey, doc, look, you've upped my Synthroid or other pharmaceutical. I still feel terrible. And they're just going to up the drug more and more and more. So it's like you're jamming this gas pedal down, but you're not figuring out what's the issue in the first place. And so for us, we're always going to be looking at the gut, looking for infections, seeing what could be going on. Why is there some type of attack going on? And then also looking at adrenals too, and figure out what's the adrenal thyroid connection. Maybe you could brief people on that a little bit, how someone with adrenal issues could have thyroid issues and vice versa.
Yeah. So Evan, your question was looking at adrenal and thyroid issues. We also have a listener question as well, talking about thyroid and gluten sensitivity. I'll try to interweave the two answers. But again, adrenals are really important because you have cortisol production coming from the adrenals, which is important for managing stress and inflammation. Also generating energy via blood sugar. Also, cortisol is needed for a healthy thyroid conversion. So if we have too high cortisol, if our stress response is too high, we're kind of in like a stage 1 adrenal issue, that can block thyroid conversion. So we have this T4 thyroid hormone that gets converted downstream to T3, and T4 is relatively inactive compared to T3. So we have to make this conversion. There's a lot of things that are needed for that, whether it's selenium or zinc or vitamin A or other nutrients to help make that conversion. But cortisol, from a hormonal perspective, is also needed. So if we're too low on our stress response, right, we have this HPA axis dysregulation, the brain, the H and the P, the hypothalamus and pituitary, are hypo-functioning. They're dysregulated, like a broken thermostat in your house doesn't turn on the heat or turn on the air conditioning. That same thing is needed to help make that conversion from T4 to T3. So when we have depleted adrenals, that can strongly be an inhibiting factor of thyroid conversion. And also, if we have too much stress, one of the mechanisms the body does to regulate the stress response is to make more reverse T3, which is essentially like taking the clip out of your gun and putting blanks in there. So they fit into the magazine, they fit into the cartridge, right? But they fire, but you don't get the same metabolic effect. You don't get the increase in energy. You don't get all of the hormonal benefits. You don't have the warmness and the increased blood circulation. You don't have the degradation of cholesterol into other hormonal byproducts. So you can see that the adrenals are intimately connected. Now, answering the person's question here on gluten, gluten's really important because that's a big stimulator of leaky gut. So gluten exposure can drive leaky gut. What it does is it increases zonulin, which unzips the tight junctions in a lot of patients. Even people that aren't necessarily having a response to gluten, it shows that there's still intestinal permeability that's happening. And now the more food particles that get into the bloodstream, the more LPS that's in the gut, the more that can unzip the gut more, allow more food particles in there, and create more immune stimulation. And it's also inflammatory on the gut too. And also can create this concept known as molecular mimicry, where the immune system sees these surface proteins and it kind of mistakenly identifies it as the thyroid and can start attacking the thyroid tissue, creating more inflammation. And that can cause these thyroid follicles to spill out hormone, creating unbalanced levels.
And this could all come from gluten exposure, you're saying?
It can all come from gluten exposure. Gluten is one of the strongest stimulators of leaky gut, along with just stress, along with LPS, which is a compound produced from bacterial overgrowth, right? So the lower our stomach acid, the more stress we have, the more essentially we're not breaking down our food, the more we're going to have bad bacterial overgrowth. That's going to increase LPS. That's going to unzip those tight junctions even faster, which is going to create more immune issues, more food allergy issues. Because think about it, right? The immune system shouldn't be getting revved up to deal with food, shouldn't be getting revved up to deal with digestion. So the more that's happening, well, what that means is that your immune system is going into overdrive. One of the major reasons why people are tired when they're sick, think about it, because their immune system sucks up so much energy. So the more you're revving up your immune system by just consuming food, you're going to be constantly tired. And that's going to just drain your adrenals and drain your thyroid and increase that thyroid autoimmune attack.
Yep, well said. So, I mean, we've got the zonulin. What's the link there between zonulin and LPS? Are these connected at all? Are these going up and down in relationship to each other?
Yeah. So the more zonulin you have, typically the more of a leaky gut you're going to have. Right. So vitamin D is actually a zonulin inhibitor. So the more zonulin you have, the more leaky gut. So LPS will increase zonulin. Infections will increase zonulin. Gluten will increase zonulin. And that basically, if this is like the Parker jacket you're wearing, it's kind of like unzipping those tight junctions. And then basically food particles can get in there. LPS particles can get in there. When LPS flows to the brain and makes its way up to the brain, because leaky gut, leaky brain, that LPS can create inflammation in the brain, which feels like brain fog, which feels like mood issues, which feels like depression, which feels like anxiety. And this is really hard for a lot of people. Getting back to Evan's question on gluten in the brain, is people may have a gluten issue, think that, well, gluten has to cause digestive problems, diarrhea, bloating, gas, reflux, constipation, diarrhea, but it may not. It may be causing depression, anxiety, brain fog, poor memory, poor just word recall. And you may have a gluten issue, but it may not even be caused by, you may not see it because it's not those conventional symptoms. And again, that same thing is going to create thyroid issues too, because that same mechanism that opens up the lining or the blood-brain barrier in the brain also affects the gut, which then creates that more autoimmune thyroid attack.
Well said. And there's a lot of people that try to justify eating gluten to us, whether it's like organic wheat or they're doing some type of like sprouted wheat or something like that. But gluten is gluten. And even if you're not celiac, now there is research that shows that celiacs are going to have 30 times higher zonulin levels than a non-celiac. So massive, massive leaky gut in a celiac person in comparison.
Right. Mm-hmm.
But still, I mean, we could even talk about the study. It's Scandinavian Journal of Gastroenterology. It showed that gliadin, which is a gluten protein, can affect zonulin even in people without the gene for celiac. And so basically they said, gliadin, regardless of whether you're celiac or not, it's still going to activate zonulin. Therefore, leaky gut, therefore this LPS, these endotoxins are still going to get in there, which is crazy. And I love that. I love that there's science, because then you and I aren't the bad guys when we're telling people to get rid of gluten. It's like, look, here's the research. Yeah, maybe you don't get acne from gluten, but you're still causing leaky gut regardless. I love that we can actually prove that, and it's not just our opinion because we're the nutrition guys.
That's the key thing that you mentioned there, Evan, is the zonulin and the gluten can trigger the leaky gut, and you may not necessarily have an autoimmunity. And the question is, the more stressed you become, the more immune compromised you become, the more your toxic burden, your stress burden, the more the physical, chemical, and emotional stress buckets get full. That's where your body's ability to adapt to stress really becomes inhibited. And again, the biggest mechanism really is the leaky gut. Even if you're not necessarily gluten sensitive, you may be getting a leaky gut, which is adding stress to that stress bucket, right? It's decreasing stomach acid. It's decreasing enzymes. It's increasing ability to have food allergens. It's increasing chance for infections and SIBO, because the more your immune system's weakened in the gut, the more that force field, that IgA gets lower and critters can come in. So yeah, 100%. And again, a lot of people, I'm not a big fan of gluten because it's hard to break down. It's heavily pesticide. It's low in nutrient density. A lot of the anthropological data on it shows that it's been consumed only about 10,000 years ago. And the people that consumed it typically had lower body stature, smaller in skeletal structure, and increased risk for osteoporosis. Again, hunter-gatherers tend to be more foragers, starchy tubers, berries, those kind of things, and obviously meat and bone marrow. You study how the brain evolved. Really, it was the hand axe that allowed us to carve into bones and access bone marrow, and then create spears to kill animals and access that nutrients to grow our brains massively, omega-3 fats from the fish. So all of those things were huge in evolving our brains. Now, getting back to thyroid, we got a couple of questions over here from the listeners here on YouTube. So I'm going to list a couple off. Couple is, how do you test for autoimmunity? Well, number one, kind of tying it back to thyroid, we would look at TPO, which is thyroid peroxidase antibodies, or antithyroid globulin antibodies to look for immune attack on the thyroid tissue. Also, we could look at TSI, immunoglobulin, which is a marker for Graves' disease, which is also a thyroid condition, or TSH receptor antibodies for the hyper. TSH receptor antibodies for the hyper, TSI for the hyper, and then TPO and thyroglobulin antibodies for the hypo. Now, again, you can have the hypo antibodies, though, and have hyper symptoms initially. So you can kind of be in both stages at one point. So just kind of keep that in mind.
Say that one more time, just so people are clear. That seems a bit confusing.
A lot of people that start out with hypothyroid antibodies, low thyroid function antibodies, the TPO and the thyroglobulin antibodies, even though those are markers for Hashimoto's, they can progress into hyper symptoms initially because your thyroid follicles have about 4 months of thyroid hormone stored in it. So what that means is you can spill out that thyroid hormone many, many months before, even up to a year or so before you actually get depleted and go low. And that's where the TSH gets really high. TSH will go high as the thyroid gets depleted, but in the initial attacks in the first year or so, you may feel more hyper symptoms, even though it's a hypo Hashimoto thyroid mechanism that's happening.
Ah, got it. Well said. Okay. So people may self-diagnose themselves with hyperthyroidism, you're saying, but it actually could be a hypo caused by Hashimoto situation that's going on. They just don't feel the full effects yet because it's a new attack. Is that right?
Totally. So the symptoms they may have is more irritability, anxiety, mood issues, difficulty sleeping, heart palpitations. They may have like tired but wired kind of feeling. Those are the big things that they're going to have. I would say, yeah, the anxiety is going to be a big one. Difficulty sleeping is going to be a big one. Where the hypo symptoms start to come in, again, you may still have anxiety. You may still have depression. The big difference is you're going to start to see the hair thinning because thyroid hormones needed for hair follicle growth. So the outer third of the eyebrows go. The hair starts to thin on top. Cold hands and cold feet starts to happen. You may start to see constipation issues too. You may start to see your triglycerides and your cholesterol go up. Again, infections can cause constipation too. Increased insulin can also increase cholesterol and triglycerides too. So there's other things, but that's a general indication is the cold hands, the cold feet, the fatigue, the hair loss, the constipation, and the increase in lipids you're going to see. That's why you want to test a full thyroid panel, which is going to consist of TSH, brain hormone, T4, inactive thyroid hormone, free in total, T3, which is converted peripherally, 20%, and then 80% throughout the body, free in total. And then obviously your T3 uptake. You can look at thyroid binding globulin, which can go up or down if you have PCOS or on birth control, and then also reverse T3 and all the antibodies I mentioned.
Yeah. So I've also read about another one that I've not seen used very much called TRAB, thyroid stimulating hormone receptor antibody. But it says that the antibody is only ordered when someone is hyper, and a positive result for that usually means Graves. I've not seen that one that often though.
It's just a different name for, I think, the TSH receptor antibodies. Like TPO also has like a name called microsomal antibodies. So again, typically it's the same name. So TSH receptor antibodies, that's probably another name for that. Just like the microsomal is the same name for TPO.
Ah, okay.
That's probably what's happening.
Got it. Now, should we talk about, is this the time where we should talk about the link between infections and thyroid health? Because people that we're looking at, we're not just going to look at thyroid, we're going to look at the gut too. And the average between us is about 1 in 3 of having infections. You know, every third person is going to show up with infections. Sometimes even, you know, those weeks, sometimes it's totally. 9 out of every 10 people has a parasite or other infection.
Totally. So we have a few questions coming on the YouTube live board here that we'll kind of tie in. But yeah, so the big infections that can affect thyroid and can increase that thyroid autoimmunity: H. pylori, okay, Yersinia enterocolitica, blasto, E. histo. Those are going to be the big ones that are really going to affect the thyroid. Even Lyme has a specific amino acid pattern that can create autoimmunity to the thyroid. So for sure, those are the big ones. Now, there's been studies showing that when you eradicate H. pylori, there's an Italian study out there that thyroid antibodies significantly drop. I have a video on blasto, right? Blasto infections are resolved, antibodies drop. Same with Yersinia, infections drop. As you attack Lyme, right? Antibodies drop. So that can be a big stimulator and drive more leaky gut, more zonulin, more immune stress, which then creates lower stomach acid and enzyme environments, which creates more adrenal stress, more thyroid stress, and more nutrient deficiencies, which perpetuate everything. So you can see if we don't get to the root cause in this, that's fine. You can go see your conventional medical doctor to make sure your TSH isn't elevated, right? But in the end, you're still going to be suffering. And that's why I have so many patients, and I know you do as well, that have all these symptoms and have seen their doctor for over a decade and are just tired of it. They're like, all right, this can't just be my thyroid, and all that we've done is put us on 50 mics or 100 mics of Synthroid, and that's it. We can't do anything else. They know there's something more, and that's why they're reaching out to people like you and myself, Evan.
Yeah, well, and the toolbox is just not there, right? I mean, it's not their fault. They're just doing all that they've got. That's the only tool in the shed is the surgery, or wait till you have some type of disease or some big nodule or a goiter or something crazy. And now we have to do surgery.
Yeah. And a lot of people are talking about, well, what if you don't have antibodies coming back on your thyroid? My personal take on that is about 40% come back false negative. So it's negative, but it could be positive. So what does that mean? Well, typically I'll run the antibodies on someone at least 3 or 4 times before I say that they probably don't have an autoimmune issue. At least 3 or 4 times. Now, the gold standard is a biopsy. So they'll go in with a needle aspiration and they'll poke it into the thyroid and they'll see if the tissues have any lymphocyte infiltration. So there's an immune response going into the thyroid. So you can also have, your conventional physician palpate it. They'll typically reach around your neck. So here's my Adam's apple. So it's down just maybe a centimeter and then out 1 to 2 centimeters. So it's right here. And then you could typically run your finger right across it. And then you can touch and push from one side to the other and just feel the surface, see if it feels smooth. And then you can swallow and feel that structure. And you can feel like a little nodule or a little bump. And that's possible. And a nodule can typically mean either an autoimmunity or it can mean an iodine deficiency. Again, you can go to your conventional physician for that. I talked about the needle aspiration, which I don't recommend unless you really want to know 100%. The next more conservative approach would be a thyroid ultrasound to see if there's any swelling at all.
Yeah.
And so my first line of defense would be, all right, let's do your antibodies. Second line would be ultrasound. I typically wouldn't recommend the needle biopsy unless you're more worried about the cancer side of it, right? If we're more worried about cancer, then we may do that, or we may do a thyroid scan. But again, those are more invasive. I really only want to save those if we're trying to rule out cancer, because typically the ultrasound and the antibodies will be the best. And we know uncontrolled Hashimoto's can lead to cancer, right? It increases your risk of cancer. So everything we're doing is actually decreasing someone's thyroid from progressing to a medullary or papillary or follicular cancer. That's the goal. So regarding that piece, everything we're doing is going to work either way because we're mitigating the gluten in the food, we're reducing the infection load, we're upping the nutrients to help lower antibodies and to help the thyroid convert. We're making all the diet and lifestyle changes and getting rid of the infections, which are going to help improve the thyroid conversion, activation, and the upstream signaling downstream.
Yeah. There was a question early on in the chat. Someone asked, how should one read the cortisol lab test for adrenal fatigue? What numbers indicate the issue? That's going to depend on the lab. Justin and I really like BioHealth, especially because they've got a brand new test that we're using now, which is a 6-point cortisol test. So any practitioners that are using a 4-point cortisol test on you, they're outdated. They need to get with the times, get with the 2017 6-point is the new one. And how can you read the numbers? Well, typically there's going to be like a high patient line, a low patient line, and then you want to be right in between those, sandwiched. And it's going to depend. So other labs are going to have different markers and different reference ranges. So for us to read the reference ranges to you, it would be really boring. But basically, long story short, you want to be perfectly sandwiched in between those two lines. And it's very rare that we see somebody in that. Most of the time, we're going to see a low cortisol picture, and this is a low free cortisol.
Exactly.
They're going to be low pretty much all day. And this is for most people. And so then we have to keep digging deeper. We don't just throw them on a bunch of adrenal support and say, good luck. We got to figure out, well, why is this happening? Is there a lot of emotional stress? Is there chemical stress? Is there thyroid issues? Is there parasites? And these are the other pieces of the puzzle.
Exactly. So you made some really good points there. So with the adrenal, the CAR test, the adrenal, the cortisol adrenal response, especially in the morning, cortisol starts off low in that first initial bit of waking up and then really pops up in that first half hour to 1 hour after waking. So Evan and I are looking more at those types of tests to see how that cortisol awakening response is happening in the morning, because cortisol is so important for thyroid activation, to prevent T3 pooling, which is T3 not getting into the cells, as well as to prevent reverse T3 upregulation, right? Reverse T3 is the blanks, right? The blank bullets that fit into the magazine that prevent the real bullets from getting fired, the real thyroid hormone being the real bullets for upregulating your metabolism. So those are the things that we're looking at. And I agree, cortisol and low cortisol and low thyroid can intimately feel the same, right? We have patients sometimes that will be like, do they have a thyroid issue or an adrenal issue? We'll run both tests and then we'll see, their TSH is, let's say, 1.5. Their T3 is at 3.2, and their conversion's okay. But we'll see, their cortisol awakening response is terrible. Their cortisol is low. Their DHEA is depleted. If they're a female patient, their hormones are off, right? So we'll be able to differentiate the two. And if you're just going based off of symptoms and trying to self-treat yourself, it's going to be really hard, because if you start going in one direction over the other, you may not get better. And then a lot of patients, they instantaneously want to go get their thyroid supported and treated first. Now, the problem with that is if you increase thyroid hormone levels and you already have lower cortisol, you can actually lower your cortisol even more, right? Just go Google Addison's disease, which is like cortisol failure, right? Addison's disease contraindications. And one of the contraindications you'll see on there is thyroid hormone. Because thyroid hormone can actually lower cortisol more. Because think about it, right? Thyroid increases metabolism. The more your metabolism's increased, the more you metabolize through your hormones as well. So if we lower our hormones and you already have super low cortisol to begin with, you can actually feel worse. This is why a lot of people feel worse when they just go after their thyroid, and it can really create more problems.
Wow. And now that you say that, I'm picturing a woman last week who she was on levothyroxine for a very long time. Her cortisol levels were like the lowest I've ever seen. So I wonder if it's that drug that's contributed to her cortisol being even lower than it would have been without the drug. What do you think?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. You can see patients that they go on their thyroid support and they start feeling worse. And it's really difficult, because if they're seeing a functional medicine practitioner, they may lose faith in that person, right? And just say, hey, well, I'm going to just keep doing what I'm doing, or I'm going to go back on the Synthroid. So you have that aspect there, right? And then you also have the fact that, what's primary? A lot of people have their adrenal issue is the more primary issue. And if we start treating that first, then we may get the patient feeling better, which then creates more compliance. The more compliance, the more the patient's going to follow through on diet, on lifestyle, on addressing infections, and that gives us a better chance to leverage the patient to do the right thing to heal.
Well said. And plus, if the adrenals get back online, then we know that conversion from T4 to T3 active is going to be better. So they may not even need to go to the quote unquote thyroid support if all these other root causes were the biggest thing. I mean, if it's a parasite and an adrenal problem, if you fix those two things, is it possible you can get away with never going into, hey, this is your thyroid program now, we just had to fix the other pieces?
Yeah, absolutely. So looking at that piece, you're 100% right. I see so many patients will measure their thyroid temperatures, like their basal temperature. And again, for basal temps, 97.8 to 98.2 Fahrenheit is going to be where you want to be for your armpit axillary temperature. And then 98.2 to 98.6 Fahrenheit is oral temperature. And typically do that in the morning before you get out of bed. And then also do it sometime in the afternoon before you have lunch, and kind of do a general average. And again, a lot of people, they'll be relatively low and they'll start to see their temperatures start going up as we treat the adrenals. One of the big things we see with adrenals is we see an erratic temperature. The temperature is kind of bouncing around. Anything greater than 0.3 degrees Fahrenheit can lead to be a sign of a potential adrenal issue via temp. And
so
then
let
also,
me ask this. Let me pause you. So you're saying 0.3 different. So that would mean if you woke up one day and you tested your armpit temperature, let's say you were 98 degrees flat in your armpit before you got out of bed.
Exactly, yep.
Then the next day you're at 98.3. To you, that's going to signify thyroid and adrenal issue. Is that right?
So we went from 98 to 98.3?
Yeah.
Yeah, so it'd be greater than 0.3. So if it was like 98 to 98.4, and we were consistently seeing this back and forth oscillation, so if we're seeing 98, 98.4, 97.9, and it's constantly bouncing back and forth greater than 0.3, that could potentially mean an adrenal issue, right? And because it's erratic, but at a good level of temperature, 97.8 or higher. So it would typically mean more of an adrenal issue. If we see it low and erratic, let's say 97 to 97.4 to 96.9 to 97.5, then that would potentially be an adrenal and a thyroid issue. And again, temperatures aren't perfect, right? Like when we assess thyroid, there's 3 indicators we use. We use subjective, which in my opinion is the most important. How do you feel? Do you have a lot more hyper or hypo symptoms? Right? Hyper symptoms being anxiety, palpitations, mood issues, tired but wired.
What about sweating? Increased sweating.
Sweating, irritability, difficult sleeping. Where the hypo symptoms, again, you can still have the mood stuff. You can still have the anxiety and mood stuff. You can still have some tired and wiry, some tired and wiry feelings, but typically more tired though. And then the big thing is the cold hands, the cold feet, the thinning hair, the thinning eyebrows, the constipation. Those are going to be the big differences. And obviously what trumps any of it is an increase in TSH or thyroid antibodies are going to be the biggest distinguishing factor if it's TPO or TSH receptor antibodies.
And I just want to mention one thing too. In a lot of cases, the people we're working with are going to have both hypo and hyperthyroid symptoms, which can be equally confusing.
Totally. Yeah. Equally confusing. I mean, when we look at like the tests that we give our patients to assess that, right. The other big ones, losing weight, even though you're unintentionally gaining weight if you're on the hypo side, or unintentionally losing weight if you're on the hyper side, right? That's going to be another big one. Elevated cholesterol, another big one. So those are a couple of the other ones I mentioned there, where the anxiety, the excessively sweating, again, hands shaking, difficulty sleeping, feeling more warm on the hyper side. Those are going to be the other big ones. And obviously having a family history, if your mom or your aunt or your uncle or a sibling has a thyroid issue, right? That's going to be a big, big factor. One of the big questions I do on all my intakes, is there any celiac disease or any autoimmunity that runs in your family, whether it's thyroid or Parkinson's or MS or ulcerative colitis or Crohn's or anything autoimmune related? Type 1 diabetes. And if there is, that really gets me to hone in there. But like testing for autoimmunity, conventional medicine typically does it like ANA or HLA-B27 or like an RA latex. Like these are like the conventional like broad markers for like scleroderma or celiac, right? Or let's see, rheumatoid arthritis or lupus. They're very non-specific a lot of times. And again, they typically are late stage markers. It takes a while for them to pop up. And again, a lot of people, they may be asymptomatic and still have them. So it's not a real motivating factor for a lot of people, where some of the things we look at, like with the thyroid antibodies, will even just a little bit above like the normal range. So like LabCorp, I think it's 33 or 36 for the TPO, where I think the thyroglobulin antibody, I think, is anything greater than 1 is positive. So if we're at like 1.5 or 2, we'll look at that and we're going to really push for autoimmune changes and autoimmune protocols. If we see TPO going above 20, we'll start to say, hey, you want to be careful with this, and we'll keep an eye on that. And then we have the, where people are in the thousands on the antibody levels. And we've made these changes, and I've seen 70, 80% drops where we take patients from 2,300 down to like 300 or 400, which is a massive drop.
And so that's diet, that's lifestyle, that's removing infections, supporting adrenals, all of those pieces, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I got a question here on Facebook Live. I'll try to connect it in here. And again, I apologize for Facebook Live listeners here. If you're watching this there, check out the YouTube so you can actually see Evan. I'm going to try to reiterate the question so you can hear it. But that'll be the best way to get the full conversation. But regarding question on Facebook Live is talking about iron. Now, iron's really important because it's a really important building block for thyroid hormone. And we also need iron for thyroid activation from T4 to T3. And we need it for just generally carrying oxygen to our cells, which is really important for cellular metabolism. So if we have low iron levels, that can be an issue. Now, I did a full video on this, so I'll refer people back to the iron video to get like the specifics on that. But again, typically we'll recommend, like in my line, we use an iron supreme. It's a ferrous bisglycinate, and we'll do about 25 milligrams of iron, anywhere between 2 to 4 times a day to help support that. But also we'll figure out the root cause, because a lot of females, it's excessive menstruation or hemorrhagia. It could be vegetarian or vegan diets, or it could be the X factor of malabsorption from gut inflammation to low stomach acid and enzymes and not being able to ionize minerals to an infection that's stealing your minerals.
Yeah, I'm so glad you brought that up because here I am thinking about myself, and the whole time I had 2 parasite infections.
Totally.
I guarantee I had low stomach acid. I guarantee I had issues with iron absorption. People listening, even if you're eating the best organic grass-fed beef, if you've got an infection that's causing stress on the gut, therefore reducing stomach acid, therefore reducing the ability for you to cleave off those amino acids and iron from the meat, you can still have trouble. And then what about ferritin too? Because the iron storage protein, that's what we're going to test for. Many times we're going to see, especially women, have very, very low ferritin levels, where if you've got a woman with ferritin levels, in between say 20 and 40, you may be experiencing something like breathlessness, for example. You could definitely have hair loss, falling out. Sometimes I'll hear women say when their ferritin's about 20, they'll say their hair's falling out in clumps. So you want to get ferritin, which is the iron storage protein. You got to get that levels tested too. And we like to see people get up, 60, 70, 80 with ferritin just to ensure that that iron storage protein is actually working. Now, and this is something that I haven't looked at very often, but I'm curious if Justin, if you've got low ferritin, are you always going to have low iron as well? Or is it possible that with low ferritin, your iron could still check out okay?
So with lower ferritin, iron serum can pop up, and it can pop up because imagine like ferritin is like the gasoline that's in the gas tank, right? And then think of like iron serum is like the iron that's actually in the carburetor and in the pistons ready to be combusted, right? So one's like iron's like what's ready to go that's in the actual engine and carburetor, and then ferritin's like what's in the gas tank, right? So obviously the more important one's going to be what's in the gas tank, because that gives you the bigger picture, right? You don't care, how much fuel is in the carburetor. It'll only take you maybe a couple hundred meters, maybe a mile. I don't know. I'm not a big car guy. So, but keep that in the back of your mind. Now, the difference is your body has a little bit more of an interplay with other systems. So inflammation can increase iron serum. So that's why we look at ferritin, but then we'll also look at it with iron saturation too. Because if we see iron saturation low, below 25, or we see TIBC or UIBC on the higher side, that means your binding proteins are growing more fingers to grab more iron. And if we see iron serum up, then we'll be like, maybe there's some inflammation. We may want to look at C-reactive protein, right? We may want to look at some of those inflammatory markers. If we're running a gut test, we may look at lactoferrin or calprotectin and see if inflammation is occurring in the gut. So it really depends on what else is happening in the body. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. It does. So if you had to pick one or the other, let's say somebody only gave you the option to run some of these specific iron markers or ferritin, what would you pick? For me, I feel like I'd pick ferritin if I could only pick one.
Yeah, I mean, ferritin for sure, but an iron panel is like $30. So there's no reason why anyone should nickel and dime on that, because you don't want to let $30 compromise getting a complete picture. So I think we run it, we can do it for $30 and that's everything. Yeah. And that gives you the ferritin, the iron serum, and that gives you the UIBC, the TIBC, the iron sat. So then you have a real complete picture of what's happening. And then, even just looking at someone's CBC can be helpful, because you can look at red blood cells, hemoglobin, hematocrit. And if that's starting to go low, then we can look at MCH, MCV, MCHC, which is basically markers to see how big your red blood cells are, right? Smaller red blood cells typically mean iron issues. Bigger red blood cells typically mean B12, folate, and B6 issues.
Wow. There was another question, and actually there was a comment up here by Tanya. She was talking about how she was able to eat gluten and dairy now after she had infections, and I guess she treated those, and now she's able to eat gluten and dairy. I feel like that depends on the person. Me personally, even if I could get away with it, I still wouldn't do it, because you're still going to increase zonulin and leaky gut and potentially set yourself up for future infections. Yeah,
that's the problem, right? Disaster doesn't occur in a day or a week, right? And we know that leaky gut can still happen even without the symptoms, right? They've just been studies where they've given people pieces of gluten and they measured symptoms, and they didn't see necessarily an increase in symptoms or negative side effects, but they saw this increase in zonulin and leaky gut because of it. Now we know that when that happens, you increase your risk of having other issues. So I know there are people right now, the same conversation would be talking to people that have been able to smoke cigarettes and not get lung cancer. Okay, great. Now, does that mean that you're going to go out and recommend smoking cigarettes to anyone? No, it's still not going to be beneficial. It's still going to be inflammatory. It still increases your risk. You don't know who the people are that are going to have the negative effects to begin with, right? It's not like you have that looking glass that you can see and know. And then also, you don't know down the road when stress comes on and when other things happen, because usually it's not just one thing. It's like, great, now this person who's talking, their stress bucket, they're already filling it halfway. So they're going into it with a half full stress bucket, thinking that they're okay, right? All right, so I got a half full stress bucket. So now when other things come into their life, they're going to overflow faster.
Agreed.
And then also other people, that gluten may overfill their stress bucket right away. And so that's why you have to make sure that you know that some people may be the exception to the rule. They aren't the rule. And this is where we have the advantage, Evan, because we see so many thousands of people that we can make correlations and actually even see causation, because we make changes and we see direct changes in the person's physiology and their symptoms getting better. So we can't create all of these protocols for the exception to the rule, because there are so many exceptions. There are people that smoke and don't get cancer. All right. We know that. And people that may consume gluten and may be okay, but the majority are going to have issues, or they may set themselves up and increase their stress bucket, right? Meaning increase their ability to handle less stress. So that when more stress comes on them, boom, now they're laid up.
Exactly. Yeah. Tanya, we had to put you on the chopping block there, because for you commenting about saying gluten and dairy and you can get away with it now, you're speaking for thousands of people that listen and do the same thing. And Justin and I will look at the symptoms of someone, and if there's still health complaints that haven't been resolved, and let's say we get their retest on like the GI map stool test, and we look at anti-gliadin antibodies, and I call it the lie detector test. I don't know if you do, Justin, but it's when you get that anti-gliadin antibodies, it's like, okay, one of three things happened. Either you got glutened, you ate gluten, or you've got cross reactivity going on. And so even if your symptoms are not supposedly there, your body's still fighting internally. There's still this internal battle going on, which is not what we want, because then those antibodies can get confused and start attacking other tissues, which we don't want.
Yeah. And it's tough because there are people that we see eat a diet that is, highly processed with a lot of carbs, and their blood sugar is relatively okay. And it may be because of they're naturally more insulin sensitive, or they exercise more. And we see some people that eat the same diet and they're diabetic. So what do you do? Like, I can't sit there and say, well, this person who eats this way and isn't diabetic, well, that means that diet is fine. No, it's not. You have to look at the greater picture. You also have to look at, well, does that diet now, is it nutrient dense? Is it anti-inflammatory? Is it low in toxins? And no, it's not. But again, don't get me wrong. Like, dairy is an open-ended topic, right? Ghee may be perfectly great. Butter may be perfectly great. Raw milk may be perfectly great for some people. But then we go into the pasteurized dairy. We go into more of the yogurts, which could be great, but it may not be. So we have to kind of have a criteria for all those different compounds, right? Because some dairy may be okay, some may not be okay. And sometimes with bread too. Some people may do okay with bread over in Europe, or they'll do fine with sourdough bread because it's fermented and there's less gluten in it, versus, let's say, wheat bread here that's conventional. So you got to look at it too, is some of those things may be okay and may have to be more specifically talked about.
Yep. She commented back. She says, we're missing the point. If parasites are the cause, you can go back to the way you were prior to eating. Oh, the way you were prior, like eating gluten. We as people ate gluten for millennia, and now it is the cause of all ills. I'll comment on it first, then I'll let you say something about it. In the modern world, we have a lot more toxins. We have a lot more things that we're up against. And so gluten, where maybe it only would have changed someone's health 2 or 3% 5,000 years ago, now it has the ability to modify someone's health 50 or 75 or even 80%. In some cases, we'll see 80% of symptoms get better without it. So for me, comparing millennia to the modern world, we've never had a world like today. So it's just not really a valid argument.
Yeah. And the grains aren't even, like, if you look at the biblical grains they talk about in the diet, and Dr. William Davis totally debunks this. If you look at the grains 2,000 years ago referenced in the Bible, these were 12 chromosome grain products versus the ones today have been hybridized and genetically modified. They're up to 50 chromosomes. The gluten content is much higher. And there's also the extra stress of potential GMOs, nutrient poor soils, as well as pesticide exposure. So it's not quite the same way. Plus, people have to look at it from this perspective. If you drive around on your car and you get a flat tire on the car, right? And you change the tire and you put the little, let's forget that. Let's just say you drive around on that flat tire for like a year. Okay. So the flat tire is the cause of what's happening here, but you drive around on that flat tire for a year. That's like ignoring the stressors of your health. It could be gluten, it could be parasites, but the longer you drive around on that flat tire, the more your front end goes out of alignment, the more your suspension goes out of whack, the more your whole shock system in the car becomes stressed. And even if you decide, let's say a year later, I'm going to change that tire and put on a nice fresh tire, which is like cutting out the gluten, managing stress, managing sleep, your car has been compromised where just changing the tire won't fix it. You're going to have to go in for a full front end alignment. You may have to get your tires rotated. You may need new shocks. Your brake pads may have worn unevenly. There's so many other issues that may have happened with the car that were collateral damage from that flat tire being ignored. So just because let's say it was a parasite issue and the parasites are now gone, or it's a gluten issue and the gluten's now gone, doesn't mean you now have nutritional deficiencies. Doesn't mean your enzymes and HCl are now affected. Doesn't mean your thyroid and your adrenals and your hormonal systems are now stressed. Doesn't mean your detoxification systems are now stressed, right? So this is what's happening. And the other analogy is you're in debt for 5 years. Great, you curtail your spending habits, but you don't get $100,000 out of debt by just changing your spending habits today. You need a bailout, or you need a lot more time to start saving and getting that money back up. Does that make sense, Evan?
Right. Yeah. Or the analogy of the spider web, where there's other pieces of the web that are affected too. So for example, we can use me as an example. You looked at me when first time I came to your house, you're like, Evan, man, look, you look like you got a parasite. You just saw it. And I was like, okay, it's been a year plus since I've eradicated those infections, but I still am using enzymes and HCl because I was in such a hypochlorhydric state that I still need to use supplemental HCl and supplemental enzymes. And I don't really have an end date in mind where I'm not going to use enzymes, because if I'm busy or if I feel like I'm just not chewing my food as much as I should, to me, I like that nutritional insurance policy in place. There was another question too that Chris asked earlier. He said, not to beat a dead horse, but is there another marker to show autoimmunity? A fail-safe? I guess since he's asking, because a lot of times
I already answered that one with the ANA and like the conventional ones.
Oh, okay.
And then the TPO. And then also I would say the gliadin antibodies via the stool testing we do. And then there's a test by Cyrex Labs that looks at leaky gut, which could give you a predisposing marker, where it looks at zonulin and occludin toxins, which can open up the tight junction. So that one will be another one I'd look at.
It's pricey. Have you run that one often? The Cyrex, I mean, it's like $600.
Yeah, I'm not a big fan of that because it doesn't tell me any of the cause. Agreed. So if people have infections and their diet's not good and we're seeing low stomach acid and low enzyme environments, it's not worth it. We're just going to work on treating the cause. And then a lot of times the clinical picture changes. People's bloating and gas and all these symptoms improve, which we know that means their digestion's getting better. They're absorbing more nutrients. That means there has to be a leaky gut mechanism happening. I'm a bigger fan of looking at causal test versus the effect test. The effect tests are only good if you're trying to convince someone or people are skeptical. Yeah. But once people that are coming to see us are very intelligent because they've already educated themselves, they listen to lots of podcasts, they read lots of blogs, they watch lots of videos, they already get it. They don't need to be convinced. They just want to be fixed. So it's a different mindset with those people.
Agreed. Well said. Yeah. And we don't have people that need to be convinced they have leaky gut. Most of the time they've already self-diagnosed themselves. And in many cases, you don't need to spend, I'd say 99.9% of the cases, you don't need to spend the money on a blood test that's going to say you have leaky gut. We could list off symptoms, boom, boom, boom. Yeah, you probably have got leaky gut. Now, Cyrex for their food sensitivity test, that is a cool one. But even then, I feel like it's unnecessary in most cases, because if you and I are going to put somebody on like an AIP approach, let's say thyroid disease did show up, some Hashimoto's, we'll have to go AIP and maybe we could try to reintroduce things, but they're going to be able to be a better barometer almost than the test in most cases. Like, oh, when I added dark chocolate back in, or when I added dairy back in, this is what happened. I feel like that's more valuable than a blood test. Maybe I'm wrong.
Totally. Do a full autoimmune elimination protocol is going to be very valuable for 90% of people. Will go on an autoimmune diet, cutting out nuts, seeds, nightshades, eggs, obviously grains, legumes, and dairy. And again, for people that are like the gluten fans that are on the message board here, they still aren't nutrient dense foods, right? If you look at the nutrients, if you look at the other compounds that aren't gluten related, right? Let's look at the fact that some people are intolerant. They just can't break it down because they're missing the enzymes to do that. And then anytime a food's not broken down, it can create stress in the body. Just like people that can't break down lactose, they're lactose intolerant, and then they have diarrhea and bloating. So some people just may be intolerant to breaking down the protein. Some people may be increasing inflammation because of the lectins and the phytic acid and the oxalates that are disrupting mineral absorption. Other people may be having the autoimmune issue. So it's still not a nutrient-dense, anti-inflammatory, low-toxin food. It's not like there's just missing nutrient that you can get out of gluten or out of these grains that you can't get in some really awesome nutrient-rich vegetables or healthy fruits or healthy starchy tubers. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. Now, this is off topic, but
it's not the missing link. That's my thing.
Agreed.
If people had said, could show me a nutrient density chart and said, "What, Dr. J, you get these nutrients, or the zinc in this is amazing, or these B vitamins," I'd say, okay, but there's just not that evidence that's there. And
right.
A great talk on this. What's his name? Out of Harvard there. Matt Lalonde did a great talk at the Ancestral Health Symposium in 2012 on nutrient density. I highly recommend anyone watching that. But when you look at the nutrient density that you're going to get in meats, especially organ meats, it's insane. It just destroys grains, and grains are the lowest out of all of those foods.
Yeah. Now we're off topic from the thyroid, but that's fine because I love that this is like a dynamic conversation.
It connects in, right? Because
it does.
These nutrients help with thyroid conversion. They help with thyroid activation. They help with the adrenals, which helps with thyroid. So even though we're off topic, we're going to do our best to kind of meander our way back to the thyroid.
Yeah. No, what I was going to say was a bit off topic, which is, all you're saying is totally on topic. But what I'm going to say is, I think it's funny how even some of these professional healthcare companies are now designing supplements, which I'm not even going to give them the credit of naming these products, but there are gluten supplements out there where it's like, here, go eat gluten, but then here's this enzyme or here's this XYZ supplement to where you can still try to eat gluten, but you just take these pills with it instead. It's like, that's ridiculous. That's like covering up the engine light on your car. The light's still there, but here's this magic tape that's going to hide it. I just don't think supplements that enable you to eat gluten is a good idea.
Now, here's the deal, right? If you have thyroid antibodies, if you have objective measures of autoimmune issues, or you're heightenedly celiac sensitive, in other words, almost like if you have gluten, like you're laid up, like you're junk for days on end, I don't ever recommend cheating with gluten. If you can manage, if you're really healthy and you don't have any severe thyroid or antibody markers popping up, then you could try going gluten-free, right? It may be rice or corn, that may be okay. Now, if you do that, I typically recommend the enzymes like the DPP4 enzymes, and we'll take it with charcoal, but it's a cheat and we're just trying to mitigate it. And we wouldn't want to ever do that as a staple to allow ourselves to eat gluten. Now, like myself, like maybe once a year, like if I'm in Boston and I'm in the North End, I may have like a cannoli, but I found an alternative. Modern's Bakeries get some really gluten-free ones that are rice flour based. But if I go, I'll up the DPP4 enzymes, I'll increase the charcoal and the vitamin C and the NAC, and that will help me deal with it. But again, it's like, if you look at the 2,000 meals I have a year, maybe one or two have that in there, right? Not a lot. We're talking 0.001%. But people that are really, really sensitive or haven't got over their health issues initially, you really want to be puritanical. And then I'll kind of dovetail this with Johnny's question here. Some of the testing that I will do to fine tune, if like patients done the autoimmune, they've kind of reintroduced things back in and they're still having issues and they're not quite sure what works, there will be some testing we'll do. Like an MRT is a pretty good test. I'm liking the ELISA ACT test as well, because it's not just antibodies, it's looking at various lymphocytes too. And I do a combination of the ELISA and I'm kind of testing the MRT as well. And I'll actually be doing some blind testing and sending some different vials in with different people's, actually my blood on with different names, and doing some blind testing on that. So hopefully I'll do a video on that soon.
You ought to try if you haven't already, I believe it's the Array 2 And there's a couple of other arrays from Cyrex too. I'm a bigger fan of that than the MRT.
Well, the problem with Cyrex, though, it's only looking at IgG or IgA. That's the issue. So with the ELISA, it's also looking at T cell lymphocyte response, and you're not going to get that picked up on a Cyrex. That's the big issue. And if you're not exposed to gluten, like let's say we're doing this test and someone's like, yeah, I haven't eaten gluten in a month or two or a couple months. Well, if the immune system isn't responding to it because it's not being exposed to it, it won't come up on the test. And then people will be like, oh, look, I'm fine, but may not be the case. So you have to look at it in complete a spectrum.
That makes sense. Okay, so the ELISA Act, and that's blood.
That's blood, exactly.
Cool. That sounds great. Well, I feel like we should probably wrap this up. I know this has been a lot of information. If people are interested in your book, then they need to sign up for your email list. I mean, you're so passionate about thyroid health. It's definitely infectious. And do we have a date on that of this thyroid book? What's up with that?
It's done, man. I'm shooting it off to the editor so we can buff it out. And, you know, I read every thyroid book on the market. I pretty much read. And my biggest issue is you can summarize every thyroid book in like 5 pages. So I want a book that's shorter. It's more condensed. I want every page to be meat. I want every page to be raw meat. I want every page to have like action items. People can walk away and really improve their health. And then if they're at a standstill, they can reach out to people like myself and you to kind of get to the next level. So that's where I'm at right now to fine tune it and boil it down. I want to touch upon one question. Dale mentioned it earlier. He talked about mercury, and mercury is an important aspect because mercury can pinch hit and affect the thyroid. There's studies showing that lowering mercury can decrease thyroid antibodies. I had one patient that had thyroglobulin antibodies over 2,000, and we saw the antibodies drop below 100. So we saw a 99% drop in antibodies by removing mercury. So we'll test that. We'll do challenge tests via urine, and we'll use various provocation agents like DMPS, which is 2,3-dimer proponic acid, or we'll do 2,3-dimer succinic acid, which is DMSA, or we can even do EDTA as well. But I typically do the DMPS challenge, and we'll be able to provoke that and see what's coming out from the mercury. That can be a big kind of underlying revealer of another aspect of what could be driving an autoimmunity, which is the mercury. And again, I know you've done the shade testing, which looks at urine, unprovoked, hair, and blood. Not a big fan of hair and blood because they don't tell you an active or a chronic level. It doesn't give you a tissue burden. And also there's studies showing that people that push more mercury out in the hair actually have better detox pathways. And they measure people that pushed less mercury out in the hair, and they actually found that they had more provoked mercury in the urine, even though they pushed less out in the hair, partly because their detox pathways were impaired.
Wow. I'm going to try yours because it sounds like I could be getting some numbers that are not what they actually are. I wonder what other heavy metals are impacting this too, though. I wonder if cadmium, for example, or aluminum is also going to impact thyroid. It seems like all heavy metals potentially could, or do you think it's specific to mercury is going to be the biggest?
Well, mercury is definitely going to be the biggest because it's one of the second or third most toxic compounds, in the world. It's really bad. So that one, obviously lead is going to be really bad too, because lead and mercury interplay, right? If you look at the lethal dose of one, if you take the dose, you get 100 rats lined up and you figure out, you keep on titrating the mercury dose up till the first rat dies out of 100. So you titrate the mercury up, the first rat dies, right? That's called the lethal dose of one, right? The 1% that kills, the dose of 1% that kills. And you do that for mercury and lead. So you have the 100 rats, right? 1 dies of mercury, right? You increase the lead up here, 1 dies of lead. And then you now combine the mercury and lead dose together to all 100 rats. They all die. Did you get that?
Yeah, I sure did.
So what they're saying is, even though it only kills 1 over here out of 100 and the lead over here kills 1 out of 100, but then when you combine it together and give it to all 100, all of them die, meaning that these metals are synergistically connected and can have exponential effects when added. So if you see mercury and lead together, typically the compounds that we're using are going to be specific to mercury and lead for sure. So you don't have to give a special one for mercury and a special one for lead, right? So you give it and it would globally affect mercury and lead, and typically cadmium as well. But we'd also want to give extra binders. Chris Shea talks about this, like MCT, like modified citrus pectin, MCP actually. We'd also give maybe charcoal or bentonite clays. We'd also use things like chlorella. especially for mercury. And we'd also use things to support detoxification. So in my line, we use heavy metal clear, and then we also use DMPS, and we'll use a lot of sulfur amino acid support to run phase 2 detoxification as well.
And still eat your broccoli, folks.
Oh yeah, your cruciferous are going to be really important for your DIM and indole-3 carbinol, which help run phase 2 detoxification.
Awesome.
Well, anything else here? Any other questions we wanted to run to on the YouTube live here? Anything else we can answer?
I think that was everything.
I think we hit it all up pretty well.
That was.
Oh, I didn't touch upon this. Let me just hit it real quick. Iodine. Iodine's a really important nutrient for the iodination process to make thyroid hormone, right? If you look at the T typically stands for, some people say thyroid or tyrosine, and then the 4 number is the iodine. So you have this iodination process, and then you have the 5' deiodinase that comes in there and it grabs and pulls off an iodine and activates it, makes it T3. Well, that enzyme that activates thyroid hormone is selenium dependent and comes from the liver. So healthy liver function is really important. But having adequate iron as well is important, but having adequate iodine is also important. RDA is about 150 to 200 micrograms a day to at least prevent goiter. Now, some people may need more than that. Now, you have people like Brownstein and other doctors that are going super, super high, 25, 50 milligrams a day. I'm very, very cautious of doing any high dose iodine. I've seen too many patients like literally just lose their hair, like just like gaps, like handfuls come out, and their thyroid has gotten worse. So number one, like if we give iodine and they have autoimmunity, it's typically months later after we've stabilized the gluten, stabilized the adrenals, supporting thyroid, supporting nutrients, supporting the gut, get their diet in shape, get their digestion better. And then we'll start very low and we'll gradually work them up, but we'll be checking in, we'll be monitoring it, and we'll be doing very low doses and then gradually tapering it up. But we're also making sure there's enough selenium there, enough B vitamins, enough minerals, enough vitamin C. So we'll make sure there's a lot of other cofactors, because when you give iodine, it can spit out hydrogen peroxide, which can increase B cell lymphocyte infiltration into the thyroid. So it can exacerbate autoimmunity. So if we do it, we're doing it responsible. We're doing lower end RDA doses as a starting point, and then gradually working our way up from there.
So what about working in foods at the same time? So I've heard some people, anti-kelp people out there, and I don't know why there's some anti-kelp people.
Well, I think you just got to be careful with kelp just because of where it's coming from with the whole Fukushima disaster a few years back and radiation. So you just got to be careful. There's some really good sources out there. You got to make sure it's not coming from one of those places. And then number two, there's a whole list of foods that you can give. Typically, like in my multi, there's going to be at least the RDA there, which is great.
Yeah.
Egg yolks are going to have some iodine as well. Obviously, seaweed's going to have some good iodine sources. You just have to make sure that it's not going to be the Fukushima kind. I'll get a list right here. I'll read off a couple of foods that are really high in iodine in just 1 second.
I've heard strawberries too, which is interesting. And then I also wonder, it's hard to get a composition sheet for like a Himalayan pink salt. I wonder if you're going to get any iodine from pink salt or not.
Yeah, I mean, there may be some trace amounts there. I know iodized salt, 1 gram will have about 77 micrograms. There is some research showing that increased iodized salt consumption did increase autoimmunity. And it could just be that these are the general public. They're just taking it. They already have a poor diet and they don't have the selenium and the Bs and the minerals and the vitamin C in the background. And maybe that's why that's happened. So it's hard to say. So there's studies on that showing there could be an issue. But things like cod, right? Things like shrimp, things like turkey, even some navy beans, even some tuna, even some eggs are going to have some good iodine. I mean, 1 egg's going to have about 12 to 15 micrograms of iodine. So if you do 4 eggs a day, that's about 60. You get a good multi, that'll be 150. You have some fish, you have some other foods, you're at like 300-400 micrograms. Now, you may need to go higher, but you got to work with your physician or functional medicine practitioner to be monitoring the antibodies and make sure you have all your ducks in a row first before you go there.
Yeah, I mean, there's people that'll just start covering themselves in iodine. And so that could be a bad idea, you're saying, because you could actually increase antibodies, right?
Totally can increase antibodies. You got to be careful with that.
It's weird. For some reason, iodine's one of those things in kind of the, I guess we'll call it the natural health community, it's been portrayed as very benign. And I remember even in some of the classes I was taking down in Austin, I remember a girl in class, she like every day she was painting her arm with iodine. And she's just like, it's the greatest nutrient ever. And I'm just like, oh my Lord, like this is out of control.
Well, painting it on your skin, for the most part, 80% of it evaporates. Okay. The only time I recommend painting it on your skin is if you have fibrocystic breast disease, and you have a lot of cysts and painful breast tissue. Painting it on the breast tissue can be great because you're driving that iodine right into the localized spot where there's the cyst, which can help. But outside of that, I mean, if you need iodine systemically for your body and for your thyroid function, you want to take it in your body. I typically do a liquid potassium iodide source.
So she probably wasn't making herself toxic then. She was just turning herself brown. Yeah,
80% of it. There's, the iodine patch test, like the faster it evaporates, meaning the more your body absorbed it, the slower it evaporates, the more iodine you have. It's very crude measurement, right? The better test is going to be like Hakala, or I think Doctor's Data does an iodine loading test. I think it's 25 to 50 milligrams of iodine. Then you test your urine and see how much you pee out. So the goal is, if you pee out 90% or more, it means your iodine levels are saturated. If you pee out less than 90%, right? If you pee out less than 90%, that means your body grabbed more of that iodine. So as you're essentially low, that's the theory on that. 90% or more, you're okay. Less than 90, you're low.
That's interesting.
But again, regarding iodine, you got to do it responsibly. Think of iodine as like gasoline on the fire.
Yeah.
Right. Gasoline's not bad when you put it in your car, but if your car's on fire and you start putting gasoline in your car, you can create problems, obviously, right? That's kind of what's happening with your thyroid. That's why you want to look at everything holistically, and you want the body system approach that Evan and I use, the key three, looking at the hormones, ATF, adrenals, thyroid, female hormones, or ATM, adrenals, thyroid, male hormones, gut and infections, repleting nutrients, digestion better, food allergies, and then looking at detox and nutrients as well.
Yep. Well said. Go to justinhealth.com to schedule consults with Justin. Check out the thyroid video series. Got a hormone video series too. You've got the supplement line there. And then you could check out my stuff too, notjustpaleo.com, or you could just Google either of us, Justin, Dr. Justin Marchegiani, Evan Brand. You'll find us both. And stay tuned, because this is really fun. And I don't know about you, but I'm loving this. I think maybe 3 to 5 times more than just doing like an off-air podcast, because people are asking questions and it's like shaping and structuring this little organic podcast ball.
Yeah, I love it. We love the questions. We like just having this little kind of dialogue back and forth, and then, someone responds over here. Let's see what they said. And then we kind of see if we can interject it into the conversation. It's great. Totally malleable. We're on the fly. I love it. It's like improv, right? It's like we're on the stage doing our little improv podcast.
There's no cuts. There's no edits. There's no.
We're raw, man. This is it. What you see.
This is the real. This is the real deal. There's not a makeup person coming in and touching you up here. I mean, this is the real deal.
If you guys liking this, we're gonna do it a lot more. We just need thumbs up. We need likes. We need shares. Show us the love. Go like Evan's channel. Share the podcast. And then we're going to do more of this and get everyone's questions answered and just provide more value. Like, how can we provide more value to our listeners and improve their health?
Yeah, and I think I mentioned it already, but if you want to schedule a consult with Justin, just go to the website, justinhealth.com. You could schedule the consults there. And same thing for me, notjustpaleo.com. And we'll chat with you all next week.
And let's do something next week, maybe on like clinical success stories that we're having in the practice. Like,
well, that'd be fun.
That are coming in and just like maybe like go over our top 3 stories of the week. Because I mean, we see so many patients, we can pick out 3 easily.
Yeah, well, I thought of something too. Actually, a woman who was struggling with fertility, she's now pregnant, and I figured getting her on and talking about her story with parasites and how her fertility was compromised due to the infections, getting her on the air, maybe asking them. We'd have to make it fun for them too, for them to take time out of it, but get them to share their story and just kind of talk them through what we've did. Cause I think that's the most remarkable part of all this, is getting to hear the feedback, which a lot of people, they're not getting to hear these stories. And this is what keeps us motivated and keeps us going.
I love it, Evan. That sounds awesome, man. Well, let's connect real soon, brother.
Take care.
You take care. Bye now.
Bye.
Got a question for Dr. J? Go to beyondwellnessradio.com and click the questions button. Then tune in to hear the answer. Also, if you like the show, click below to review us on iTunes. For more Beyond Wellness Radio, go to beyondwellnessradio.com.